and welcome to our third episode. Who's counting? If you're lucky enough to find us for the first time, welcome. I'm here with my co-host Wayne Byrne, and we're going to be talking about two favourite horror films from the 60s, Carnival of Souls and Plague of the Zombies. Wayne, say hello to the nice people, please.
Hello to the nice people, please.
Very good. And so, Wayne, you chose Carnival of Souls. Could you give us a little bit of a lead into this, what this wonderful film is about? So I should warn people before we get stuck into these, we do spoilers. So you know what we're talking about. If you don't want it spoiled, go and watch them and then come back and listen to us gabble on for a half an hour. So Wayne is going to tell us a plot, and I'm going to spoil it if he doesn't.
So the story, as threadbare as it is about a young woman named Mary who's involved in a car crash at the start of the film. She emerges from the wreck relatively unscathed, considering that all her friends are dead. She's a little bit shook, as you would be, but she's on her way to start a new life as a church organist. And en route to her new job, new life, she starts having these visions of a ghoulish individual. She passes this big monolithic building out on the Great Salt Lakes there in Utah, Salt Air Pavilion, and she's strangely drawn to it. She doesn't really know why. Beautiful abandoned building that just harbors mystery and ghosts of the past, and she'll experience all that when she actually does go and finally visit it. But so she lands in this town, and she meets all these kind of creepy and unusual and eccentric people, but she keeps having visions of this ghoul who is kind of leading her back out there to the Salt Air Pavilion. That's essentially the plot of it. But I would say it's not about the plot. It's certainly not about the acting, because the acting
this is the thing. Herk Harvey is great with imagery and ideas, but he has a terrible hold on his actors.
I would say yes. As bad as some of the acting is, it doesn't affect the film, because I think it's very much a mood piece in the vein of, Herk Harvey said he wanted the look of a Bergman and the feel of a Cocteau. And you can certainly, there are elements of what you'd find in, Cocteau's The Blood of a Poet or Bergman's The Hour of the Wolf, where you have a very surface narrative, very, very bare. But it's not about that. It's about the experience. It's about the mood and the tone and the feeling of the piece. It's surreal. It's expressionistic. Little elements of the Gothic in there, but it's very dreamlike, and it's very effective. And to me, the acting, if anything, the off quality of the acting helps it. It helps the mood, because she's supposed to be in this kind of shell-shocked, frame of mind, and everybody just seems quite off. And it's quite obvious, I think, in places that it's the acting, but it suits it, because the characters are supposed to be eccentric and unusual and creepy. So I think its flaws are actually its virtues as well. It all adds up to this wonderful, and it's very short as well. About in around 80 minutes, depending on what cut you watch, because the original version, the drive-in version, if you will, is 77 minutes, and there was a director's cut released when it was re-released in Art House Cinemas in 1989. He added on another extra 5 minutes, but it's just a terrific film, and I honestly believe it is one of the great moments in American cinema, in the history of American cinema, certainly horror cinema.
The film was made by an industrial filmmaker who did training movies and that, and it was written by one of his, was it Jack Clifford or something?
John Clifford.
John Clifford, who worked with him. And he gave him, he said, go write me a script. The only thing I will insist on is that there's a dance of kind of spooky types at the end of the film.
Well, like the character of Mary in the film, how it came about was Herk Harvey was on a location scout for one of his industrial films. And as he was driving back home to Lawrence, Kansas, he passed the Salt Air Pavilion. And he, like the character, was drawn to this huge, beautiful piece of architecture that stood desolate, isolated, haunting looking in the landscape. So he said, I really have to craft a film around this. And he did, and ultimately the central character in Carnival of Souls probably is the Salt Air Pavilion rather than Mary, because like that, she doesn't have a whole lot of personality either, and you could say that's probably partly due to the twist that we find out, what's happening.
Isn't that Mormon country?
Yes, yeah.
I only watched it yesterday because I'm always late doing my homework, and I had seen it a few times before, but What struck me was that Mary is playing the organ in the church, yet she's no sense of religion about her, and there's a sort of a sense she's being punished. As the visions continue, there's one particular vision that was quite interesting, is where she goes off on one and she thinks she's dancing with all these ghouls that they are really harassing her. By the way, there's no kind of nice come hither into the night, it's time to leave this mortal coil. They're hounding the hell out of her, and she ends up playing this mad, insane piece of organ music, which is the go-to soundtrack, by the way, which drove me up the wall towards the end.
Oh, I love it.
The film was made under duress. It was entire sequences got lost to the lab that would have really made an amazing work of that final act. And they lost so much footage. I love the guerrilla filmmaking in it.
Oh, it's absolutely so special. And, people have said that it's influenced Romero, but I guess probably because the final scenes and the way the ghouls attack and all that kind of thing. But I think more so, David Lynch has said it was a huge influence on him, and I think that's more obvious than, say, Romero, because Romero doesn't really deal in kind of surrealism that often.
I would say Herk saw a few Buñuel movies as well.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, without a shadow of a doubt, you know what I mean? Because of his use of montage as well in there. And it's interesting in terms of, from a kind of a film history point of view. Made in 1962, the film is entirely singular. It doesn't fit. You can't say it fits in with the golden age, even though it's coming at the tail end of the golden age. It doesn't fit into the new Hollywood. You can't say it's of a particular time other than being early 60s. It doesn't kind of subscribe to any kind of, how would you say, aesthetic mold of either the golden age or the new Hollywood. It's just completely independent, singular. It's Herk Harvey's one and only feature film. Actually, the one thing that I would say that you could compare it to is, it feels like the greatest Twilight Zone episode that they never made. It has that kind of quality and, how do you say, that twist.
But it is that, I think I read somewhere that it was influenced by Twilight Zone episode about a woman who's being haunted by a hitchhiker that she's run over, and she can't escape seeing him everywhere she looks.
Yeah, there's definitely elements of the hitcher or the hitchhiker in there, and also it's some people have said it's kind of based on Ambrose Bierce's An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, but it's only in the respect that it has that kind of uncertain reality about it, and it has the twist ending, which many viewers will be familiar with. I think they'll pick up on it quite easily, what the twist is and how, when it's coming, because if you've seen many ghost stories down the years, down the decades, you'll realize the structure it's taking. But it's not about narrative structure, this film. It's definitely about the mood and the tone and the expressionism. It's about the images, and I think that's what's so great about it as well. Is got Herk Harvey and these guys were so used to making these factual, they were making documentaries, or they were making kind of educational fictional narratives, but very matter-of-factly. There wasn't a whole lot of art involved in those kind of films. But here it is, the one film he made, the one feature film, and it's an absolute masterpiece of filmmaking in terms of aesthetics and visuals, and it's a great, it had a reputation as being a drive-in movie or a B movie down the years, and it was lost in, the public domain, that kind of thing. But in 1989, it was re-released and reappraised as a great American art house horror film, and that was terrific to see. And it's been re-released now by Criterion several times, so which kind of alludes to its place now in horror history as a serious piece of work, because it languished for a long time, as a kind of a late night B movie also ran. But here it is, now acclaimed. Well, I'm acclaiming it as one of the great works of American art.
The cinematographer, well, obviously one of the lads who did his industrial movies, I found some of the interiors quite hilarious, because it was like he used every light in the kit to light up the set. He was just wasn't netting. Hey, we got one light this lit. We got light. We got more lights.
I would say that's a nice contrast, though, to the exteriors, the kind of the eerier stuff. That you have this kind of very, very bright lit, almost maybe television look kind of thing going on.
I mean, the film was made for something like 33,000 at the time, which is which is still not a lot of money when you consider them working with film. And they also they shot it in 3 weeks, was it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And under duress, I think the only one that got paid any money was the leading lady. And she got $2.5 grand.
You see, that was another problem. I think over the years was, I think they, like Night of Living Dead, they never made money off it, and here it is, kind of an influential classic until maybe the 1989 re-release, where I'm sure they got the rights back, and it did well. It was re-released all around the world, and it renewed interest in the film, quite rightly so. And I think Siskel and Ebert gave it a good review. It's been kind of praised by academics, horror academics, as a great work in the horror canon of American cinema.
My editing brain got kind of focused on how it would improve it if it was reduced by about another 20 minutes. You might think it's sacrosanct to say, but there's kind of repeat things, and it's a shame the way some of the actors don't even tend to meet each other. Though the dislocation, as you say, does provide an eeriness that she's neither happy in the so-called real world or the one where she's being tormented by these creatures. She's isolated. Once she's left the first scene, which is being rescued from the river, she's a lost soul.
Well, watch the original theatrical version, which is only 76.
No, even more condensed than that, Wayne.
No, you know what? You're bang out of order. Get your coat.
One lovely idea, and it was when I think it happens twice in the film, where she becomes dislocated by the fact that no one even acknowledges her. And they shot in real locations without, I would say, very little crowd control. And they just turned the sound off on the cameras and used the soundtrack. I thought they were really effective.
Yeah, and in that version you watched, the longer cut, there's a few more scenes that were put back in there, one of which is at the very start of the movie. And if you notice, the dialogue is badly looped. So, it's very badly dubbed or whatever. And again, it kind of adds to this eerie sense of dislocation with your surroundings, or with her surroundings, that nothing is quite what it seems, even though on the surface, the daytime scenes and the interiors are all quite bland. It's just, kind of a nice Midwestern small town, which then in comparison is great with the kind of the stuff out at the Salt Air Pavilion and all that kind of expressionistic lighting that goes on out in those scenes. It all adds up beautifully to me. It's a bunch of flaws.
The opening scene with when the two boys challenge the girls to a race on the bridge is a consummate little piece of cutting and filming. As you say, like when it goes into probably the most expensive scene in the whole film in some ways, because they drove a car off a bridge.
You know how much that cost?
I'd say about 5p.
They only owed the county $12 to fix that bridge.
There you go. That is when it's at its most, well, not its most energetic, but it's consummately done. And as you say, once the car goes in, we have all the crowds come around that they're trying to find out, can they get them out of the water or whatever. It's all looped. It's all looped dialogue, because they wouldn't have shot any sound on the day. I would guess they were actually just had people saying things, and with that kind of pace with the shooting, they wouldn't have been able to get the sound equipment in there properly.
Yeah, but they didn't do a good job then of looping it after the fact either.
I found the credits were quite unusual for the time as well.
Oh, I loved them. It's that music. Gene Moore's score is absolutely brilliant, and it's eerie, and it's surreal, and it's carnivalesque, or it kind of reminds you of a circus or something. You know what I mean? It's that kind of
Gene
unsettling.
Moore go on to do anything else?
Not that I know of. I'm not quite familiar with him, but God, based on that score,
plays a mean organ.
He absolutely does, and it's the sole instrument, I think, in the film. Even there's a scene which is quite hilarious where the lecherous neighbor.
He was the creepiest thing in the film.
Absolutely, yeah, he's creepier than the ghoul. But it's gas. There's one scene where he's kind of spying on her, and there's a close up of his eye looking through the door, and Gene Moore's
cock eye. Let's be honest.
That's one thing you could call it, I guess. But the soundtrack, if you look at that moment, is hilarious. It's brilliant, because the score, Gene Moore's organ tries to do this sleazy saxophone thing, and it's obviously an organ, but it's doing the saxophone kind of sound in the notes that you would have traditionally in that kind of sleazy atmosphere. And it's a little bit of comedy amidst the somber atmosphere of the rest of the film, I think.
Well, this sexual subplot is quite interesting, but she's basically been... he's not romancing her, but she would like to be romanced in some ways, but she's also alienated by him, but she needs him because she's scared of these hallucinations she's having. So the poor girl's caught between a rock and a hard place. And there's that creepy scene in the diner where he meets one of his friends. And it's just creepiest conversation in the world. And you're really
Yeah,
worrying for this girl what's going to happen to her next with this asshole.
he's a total lech, and he arrives over at the apartment with the whiskey and the 2 cups and just, he's
But as you say, one of the interesting issues with it is the only flaw she has is that she's just outside of everybody. She doesn't have a moral viewpoint, but she's not actually a bad person.
she's not, but she doesn't have a whole lot of personality to show to make up for it, if you know what I mean.
Do you not find that it might have been production-wise, her character changes a little bit, but not from a point of view of a story? There's certain aspects to her, like when she gets a little bit excited about and jolly over certain things, and it just comes out of left, I found.
Yeah, and especially that, going back to your man, the lecherous neighbor, there's a moment where she does kind of, again, as you say, probably for self-preservation, is to kind of embrace him almost for a short while. And we see her kind of a little bit more of maybe what she's like when she is more embracing of people, even though it's completely false in that moment, But yeah, she's not, I mean, objectively speaking, she's not a great lead character unless you're aware of the twist, because the twist makes sense. She's dead. That's it. You know what I mean? So she's basically personality free because she's, I guess, no soul or whatever. So she's a wandering spirit. So that makes her lack of personality make more sense. You know what I mean? But unless you're not aware of the twist, you're kind of going, how is she the lead character?
So she was the one who had done classes.
But she was a professional actress in this whole thing. You know what I
She
mean?
only ever did horror, I think, and then finally, I think she's actually married an actor in the end. Yeah, she called it an actor's. I think it's called An Actor's Life: The Odyssey and the Idiocy. But I think she might have been talking about her husband, she's still going, by the way, still alive and well. But apparently, she was insulted by the people who made the remake. That they didn't get in touch with her early, and they didn't invite her along.
Right.
I think have you seen it? Well, they use the title and the ending.
But it's not a remake. It's not a remake.
They use the title and the ending.
Yeah, it's a really, really bad straight-to-video horror film that was actually executive or co-produced by Wes Craven, strangely enough. But it's a shockingly bad film. It's nothing to do with this. So she has nothing to worry about.
But this brings us neatly now. You mentioned Romero, and apparently our next film, Plague of the Zombies, was an influence on Romero as well. I don't know if that's true, though it has slow zombies in it, but not flesh-eating ones.
I don't see that. I've never heard Romero acknowledge it, so I don't know.
Did he acknowledge Carnival of Souls?
I think I've read him mention it sometimes before. Yeah. But it would make more sense that he'd be influenced by that in terms of it being an independent film with a lot of great artistic resolve. I could see how that would have influenced him, and with certain scenes, obviously.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, but just to get into Plague of Zombies, Hammer film, 1966, I remember, and like most Hammer films around this time, gothic horror. I think they had access to a big period costume wardrobe, and that's why they kept making them that way. I mean, there's a few psychological horrors around the same time, but mostly they were doing the period stuff. But this is their one and only zombie film. And it should be noted that the tradition of zombie films in the 1930s was a brief period. Like we had the likes of White Zombie with Bela Lugosi, and I Walked with a Zombie was a great 40s zombie movie, but they all related to voodoo before Romero turned the genre upside down with Night of the Living Dead. So there always had to be some voodoo and magic involved to turn these creatures into the undead. And the only reason for creating undead was to get yourself a cheap workforce or a free workforce. So to get into the plot of Plague of the Zombies, it starts off with a fantastic bit of drumming, a bit of James Bernard's score, and we see 3 Haitians, as we can guess they are, banging on drums, and a guy in a ritual mask, and he's got your typical wax doll pouring blood over it, and a title that says Plague of the Zombies. We know what we're in for. But Andre Morell is the leading man in this. A lot of people know him from playing official judge characters and old duffers. And he also played Quatermass in the BBC version of Quatermass in the Pit.
Wasn't he in Hound of the Baskervilles as well?
He was Watson once upon a time with Peter Cushing in Hound of the Baskervilles, which was written by the same writer of Plague of the Zombies.
Was it? Didn't realize
So
that.
in my head, I always like to play it as being a sequel to Hound of the Baskervilles and Watson's Weekend Off.
Weekend away in the Cornish village. Like,
The film was made by John Gilling. Okay, I'll get the plot out of the way. Village is plagued with zombies in the form of a curse. They're all been hit with a virus. They're dropping like flies, and the young doctor has no idea what's going on. Being 1860s, digging up bodies and doing autopsies is frowned upon. And the doctor's taking the heat for the fact that everybody's dropping like flies. He writes a letter to his old professor, and he is encouraged by his suffragette-like daughter to go down and check things out. You know, she's a great character. I can't remember the actress name. Claire Barnes, the actress.
who he tells he should have drowned at birth.
Yes, that's the one. Yeah, but you can tell they love each other. You know, and so he is kind of dragged down to Cornwall, where he's told he might get some fishing in. Obviously, he's never been near the tin mines of Cornwall. Not a fishing spot in sight. And they meet the nasty upper class yobbos in the form of a fox hunting troupe who Claire sends off on a wild fox chase, i.e. she points in the wrong direction, which causes terrible trouble. Um, Meanwhile, there's a funeral going on. A corpse is knocked out of a box, and we realise things aren't well in this little Cornish village. To cut a long story short, the local squire has been turning all the local populace into zombies so he can keep mining for tin, which is
Squire Hamilton
by John Carnes, a great actor, always played cads and toffs. In the Hound of the Baskervilles, which was written by Peter Bryan, it's a very successful adaptation of Sherlock Holmes, but it's also a very successful Hammer horror film. They really did get the elements of Hammer and Holmes to meet beautifully. And it starts off with a really nasty scene. There's a great backstory to the Hound of the Baskervilles, how one of the original Baskervilles had treated this woman terribly and was struck down by the Hound. And they actually show the entire story. So it's this nasty chase where they have a girl captured upstairs, she escapes, and they hunt her down. A bit of a Hellfire Club mood going on there. And they get to the swamp, and the squire is attacked by the Hound. And I just felt that Peter Bryan was wondering what these guys would do on other days of the week when they weren't hunting down women on the marshes. And of course, what would they be doing? They'd be hunting foxes, drinking like leches up in their boys' club, and whipping zombies down in the tin mines at the weekend.
Yeah, breaking down the unofficial kind of union activity there.
It's a nice script. And I think Andre Morell gives it a great gravitas. He's just one of those great old actors who's fun to look at and see in action. And he gets away with some of the worst dialogue in the world, but there is great dialogue in it as well, I must say. And there's a lot of humour in it. I don't think it ever takes itself over seriously.
But like Andre Morell, even Squire Hamilton, he's played so charmingly, that you can't.
He doesn't crack a smile.
Nobody has that kind of very regal, handsome thing going on, and of course the ladies are kind of drawn to him for this, even the lead character is.
Yeah, that and his use of black magic. And again, I always loved that as a kid, especially, was these rituals. Like, I need a bit of blood, I got my magic box and my magic spell. So there's this wonderful contrivance where poor Claire Barnes, who has upset all his fox hunting yobbos earlier and nearly pays the price when they drag her back to the mansion. He saves her, but he decides he wants to have her as well. Yeah, but you're not sure what his intention is. Does he want her to mine tin, or does he want a zombie wife? It never really goes there.
I have to say, they are the worst zombie workers I've ever seen. They are so bloody slow. Even when they get the lash on the back.
Yeah, but that's the ultimate kind of plot hole there. I mean, who creates zombies and then whips them? I thought they were supposed to do what they were told in the first place.
They're not very industrious, I have to say.
Well, it's a very small space. If you remember the mine, it's about the size of your average sitting room. There's not much room to shuffle.
That's true.
But you know what I do think? I do think those zombies were an influence on a series of Spanish zombie movies.
Oh, yeah.
And I know Hammer did have a great effect on the likes of Jess Franco and that in the 60s. Because for some reason, all the zombies end up in this garb that makes them look like monks. They look like zombie monks. They're not zombie monks, they're villagers. And there was a bunch of zombie priest-like creatures that were running amok in zombie movies, which I will mark with a picture when I edit this later on. So to make up for my lack of knowledge now. But also, so the other joys in this film are Michael Ripper. He's like who's the guy who plays Cliff in Cheers?
Oh,
Ratzenberger.
John Ratzenberger.
John Ratzenberger. He is to Hammer what Ratzenberger was to Pixar. He's in nearly every Hammer movie. But in this film, he gets a particularly juicy role as Constable Swift, who interrupts a late night corpse digging up when the lads decide they need an autopsy to find out what's going on here.
Just another Friday night in that village.
But the great reveal is that there isn't even a body for anyone to be accused of body snatching with. So it's kind of coffin snatching. But anyway, Constable Swift helps in his little way. But again, the cops have very little to do with the rest of the plot. Is that it becomes, Andre Morell realizes I'm the man who has to sort this out. And he decides to confront Squire Hamilton and his cohorts. And it does a very messy job about it. Hammer films always loved a good fire. Have you ever noticed that?
Yes.
They always something shit had to go on fire by the end of the movie. And the villains get great comeuppance. Poor zombies I did feel sorry for because they didn't look too happy to be going on fire.
Or working.
Or working. Just put them in the zombies, whip them. They still ain't going to do anything. It should be noted that it was directed by John Gilling as well, who had done The Reptile. And The Reptile and that were shot back to back. In fact, poor Jaqueline Pearce, who plays the first on-screen victim of this zombie infection and has to have her head chopped off as a result, played the Reptile in the other film, which is another masterpiece. I mean, Gilling's kind of knocking him out of the park for Hammer is pretty solid. He also did the Gorgon. I don't think he ever went near the main kind of heroes of Hammer, which were Frankenstein and Dracula. I don't think he did also Devil Pirates, I think.
You just said the word masterpiece there.
Yes. Hammer masterpiece.
Would you rate it that highly, would you?
I would qualify it as a Hammer masterpiece. We're talking about Hammer films now.
I agree. I think it's one of my favorite, if not my favorite, Hammer film. I'm not too sure about the influence on Romero. I think it is in that nice tradition of zombie movies. It kind of goes back. It goes back to White Zombie and I Walked with a Zombie because of the Caribbean voodoo, using zombies as dead-eyed workers team. Other than the fact that the shuffling around, I don't see a connection to the Romero film because Romero's films are obviously very different aesthetically, but also they're very political as well. I don't see there's not a whole other than maybe some class.
Well, you could argue there's politics in this. Arguing about that the ruling class is abusing the poor peasant types.
Oh, definitely, but it's a different kind of political context to Romero's, I think. But I would say I do find a bit of influence in there in Lucio Fulci's Zombie Flesh Eaters. The way the camera is very in your face, it's handheld with the shuffling zombies. It's right up there, and it reminds me of a lot of the shots in Zombie Flesh Eaters. So that's kind of, and again, that has the whole Caribbean connection and using zombies for toil, all that kind of things.
But in terms of production though, Hammer again would squeeze blood out of a stone when it came to trying to make things from nothing. And as I said, like that was shot back to back with The Reptile. They use all the same locations. If you want to have fun, watch the two films as a double bill. It did okay, but they never went back to the zombie malarkey again after that.
Yeah, well, like I said, there was a bit of a gap between, that was 66, Living Dead was 68, so it was kind of before there was a kind of a zombie renaissance, if you want to put it like that, I guess.
Well, don't forget Romero himself with Night of the Living Dead. It took a long time before a reputation built strong enough for him to even get Dawn of the Dead made.
That was it. The Italians were off doing this, in the meantime, while Romero was between his various Dead movies. So zombie culture had really come alive, no pun intended, in horror cinema internationally in the intervening years. You mentioned there that there's an exploitation element in Hammer, but I think what distinguishes their films in general is there's a certain period lavish quality to them that gives them this kind of stately impression, if you know what I mean.
That's why I can't get excited about Pride and Prejudice with zombies and shit like that, because Hammer were doing all these lovely period films with monsters and all sorts going on.
Exactly, yeah, and it ties in. I think they're kind of a spiritual relative of Roger Corman's Poe adaptations, you know, which again, they have the exploitation stuff in there, but it's all wrapped in this lovely, very nicely produced aesthetic context.
But you do feel that they kept them in the period because it created a fairy tale quality that they felt made it more believable. They very rarely went contemporary with that kind of mentality, that kind of fiction, because they felt it wouldn't survive in a real world environment.
Yeah, and it's bringing you back to this oldie English, you know, gentleman squire's world, you know, and it's part of the charm, I guess. You're going into this, this old kind of.
But I especially love when again, this is what's rare about this one is it's actually set in England. Hammer, if you look at the Hammer Gothic period, most of them are set in their notion of East Europe, which is even more hilarious and fun, with Karnsteins and the village taverns and all this, with the garlic outside because you know Drax will be around by 12 o'clock. Whereas this one, which is it's a kind of shame that you know there wasn't more done with the village and the people. They're just around to give out. Even the priest turns up, and the priest is almost as useless as the priest in Carnival of Souls. Even when he's looking out for grave robbers, he falls asleep. Again, it's a great dream sequence in that film, which is quite. Again, this is a commonality between two movies. There's a great ghoulish kind of dream sequence where the person is kind of totally surrounded by the undead.
And I think that's the film at its best. You know, I think if I wouldn't quite call it a masterpiece now in any context, but I do think it's quite slow. And even though it's an 86-minute long film, it feels a lot longer than 86 minutes.
Oh, I think it's 90 actually. I think it's 90.
Is it?
Yeah.
In and around that, but yeah, hour and a half. You know what I mean? But it takes a long time before the zombie action truly kicks in. And when it does, it's great. You know, I mean, that whole last 20 minutes, 15 minutes is fantastic. And even sporadically throughout the film when it kicks off, it's brilliant, but it's an odd. It's kind of in contrast to the very long passages of leading up to it. Of
as you said, it's kind of a busy weekend. I mean, the timeline is quite vague, but it feels like it was Friday to Sunday.
Yeah.
And then things really kick off.
You know, it has that kind of Sunday afternoon Hammer horror quality to it, and that it's charming. You know, it's not the scariest horror film you'll ever see, or zombie film for that matter, but it is charming, and it's a little bit hokey and a bit stagey, but that's Hammer, isn't it?
So the right amount of people survive, and the right amount of people are killed, and everybody goes home with a smile on their face. Other Hammer films for you? I mean, what are your favourite Hammer movies?
You know what one of my favourite Hammer films was? Probably, again, it's kind of a nostalgic thing because I kind of grew up with the VHS, which was Quatermass and the Pit. I always loved those. Nigel Neal.
That would be my favourite Hammer film.
It's interesting that we matched up these two films today because talking about Carnival of Souls reminded me a lot of why I never became a Hammer aficionado. And I think it's because Carnival of Souls represents this singular independent vision that's so idiosyncratic and so original, but when you look to the Hammer films, I always find that they're very formal in their structure and in their storytelling, and there's a certain recurring, I guess, probably staginess to them. I mean, there's great ones and there's bad ones and there's good ones, but there's always a certain kind of quality to Hammer that I'd never truly fully embraced other than a certain number of films, including Quatermass and the Pit, Plague of the Zombies, The Devil Rides Out, Dracula, Prince of Darkness, things like that. But I just love what Carnival of Souls represents, which is just a one-off great piece of art that's unlike any other. But when you look at some Hammer films, there's quite a lot of them in the same mold, and they're very formal, I think.
I'll allow you that, Wayne. To quote the Jam, the public gets what the public wants. And Hammer delivered.
Well, you know, Hammer is like, to me, it's like James Bond. It's comfort, familiarity, and it's formal.
I think that's why most people go to the movies.
If there's one way I can embrace Hammer, it is as that kind of Sunday afternoon.
When you were growing up, they would have been even more old-fashioned than when I was growing up. Yeah. So I would guess, did you start enjoying them more as you got a bit older? And you could appreciate things.
No, I think the opposite, in fact. I think because when I saw them when I was younger, I wasn't as experienced in other types of cinema as I am now. So I think I was more open to enjoying them when I was younger and just embracing that kind of the kind of the hokey nature of some of them, like some of the early James Bonds as well, which were like that, a recurring feature on TV all the time. But I did love my Hammer VHS that I would bring home from chapters such as Quatermass in the Pit and just watch that over and over again, by myself on a Saturday night kind of thing. But now I'd watch it probably with more of a critical eye, but I'd also be able to appreciate it a bit more in terms of its aesthetics and filmmaking.
Well, I would say that Quatermass in the Pit stands as still one of the more sophisticated of that decade in terms of storytelling and ideas.
Yeah, I think that's why I'd probably enjoy it a bit more, because it is a bit more sophisticated in its themes and in its filmmaking. I can appreciate Plague of the Zombies for its simple pleasures, but it does remind me of some of the other Hammer films that I wouldn't probably embrace as quickly as others.
And on that note, thank you everybody for watching us get into a heated conversation. Luckily, we're not in the same room.
I can't believe you said you would cut 20 minutes out of Carnival of Souls, you absolute animal.
Sorry, did I say 20? I meant 80.
This friendship is over.
I'm only joking, Wayne. You know that. I appreciate all the things that can be appreciated about Carnival of Souls.
Excellent.
That landlady deserved her own series, by the way.
And the sleazy neighbor. Give the sleazy neighbor his whole movie.
Well, yeah, the two of them deserve their own series.
You know what that I loved in Carnival of Souls was the Angelus. Do you remember when she starts playing the lovely music, the organ music in the church, and everyone stops what they're doing? They look up and reflect, like the 6-1.
Thank you for tuning in to us to talk about those two wonderful films. Wayne, what's our recommendation for next week? What are we going to go with?
I think we should go with underrated sequels, films which we think are as good and deserve as much praise as their lauded originals. And in that case, I'm going to go with Psycho 2.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the Planet of the Apes franchise, and one of the sequels I love for all sorts of reasons that I don't know if anyone's going to agree with, but it's the third Planet of the Apes movies. It's called, what the hell is it called? Escape from the Planet of the Apes.
Excellent.
It's not a prisoner of war movie. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
Just one final thing while I think of it, Wayne. We never thanked Brian Keegan for that amazing original score he did for our show. So I'd like to big shout out Brian Keegan. Thank you for that amazing piece of music that we get to play at the start and the end of our show. Thank you.
Absolutely. Cheers, Brian.